on what part of the world you are living in. My name is Amber Bennett, and I am the Vice President of Marketing and Engagement with the American Herbal Products Association, commonly known as APA. We are the voice of the herbal products community and have taken a huge leadership role in the hemp and CBD marketplace. The supply chain in the cannabinoid category has come up several levels since the passing of the 2018 Farm Bill. Processors and manufacturers have enhanced their operating capabilities to provide the services that are needed for greater success. But more needs to be done, especially as it pertains to the industry regulatory practices. So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce my longtime friend and associate, Sheldon Baker. Sheldon is the CEO of the Baker Dillon Group, a foremost nutraceutical brand marketing firm who will moderate today's CBD panel, and 3 leading industry experts. Sheldon, it's all yours.
Great, Amber, thank you very much. Appreciate that warm introduction. And for those of you who don't know APA, the American Herbal Products Association, they are a great industry group in the nutraceutical industry. They have a very robust CBD and cannabis committee, and if you're not a member, you should give Amber, you can email you, Amber, or they can visit the website at ahpa.org, apa.org, and check out all the great things you're doing. So again, thank you very much, Amber. Appreciate it. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here and great to have you with us. If you are doing business in the CBD and hemp category or exploring opportunities, you've come to the right place today. I'm excited about today's program and the opportunity that NutriFight Today has given me to moderate this discussion. Why? Well, because I have questions just like you. But before we start down the road of CBD insights and opinions, I want to introduce our panel. Joining us from Open Book Extracts is Dave Neundorfer. He's the CEO of their North Carolina-based cannabinoid CBD ingredient company. Mike Hennesy is Vice President of Wana Wellness, and they're known for their great tasting gummies based in Colorado. And from the legal side of things is Henry Baskerville. He's a partner with Fortis Law Partners in the great state of Colorado. Gentlemen, welcome to today's CBD discussion. Wonderful to have you here. And let's talk about the CBD industry, get your opinions, where we're now, where we are now, where we're headed. And so I'm going to start off with question number 1. And Dave, let's start with you on this. Is there a problem with the CBD supply chain?
Well, it's a big question. It's an important question, Sheldon, and of course, thanks for having me on this panel. It's an important topic. The reason why we started Open Book Extracts was because the answer to that question was yes. There's a very big problem in this relatively immature supply chain. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had visions of building and launching our own CBD brand. And we went looking for supply chain partners. And it was very hard for us to find the transparency, the traceability, the accuracy of documentation, the customer service that we needed to really enter the market. And so that is the reason why we started Open Book Extracts, to bring that reliability, that consistency, that traceability and transparency to the market. That said, there's still problems with supply chain. It's come a long way since 2.5 years ago when we first started considering entering this market. But there are still some gains that need to be made to give brands and their end consumers the reliability and the consistency that they need. And I think consistency is one of the key words. We don't have consistency across the entire supply chain. There are pockets and there are groups that you can work with to have a great supply chain partner. There are also brands that don't demand that level of consistency or transparency or documentation. And therefore, there's also a pocket where there's some real problems still in the supply chain. Luckily, the trend is moving in the right direction. We see our brand clients asking of us questions and requirements for documentation that they weren't asking even 6 to 12 months ago. So the overall industry is moving in the right trajectory, and we look forward to kind of being part of the solution towards the supply chain challenges that we've had.
Mike, your thoughts?
Well, Dave said it beautifully. Is it completely broken? No. I can say as a brand, we are able to get quality, consistent supply of CBD. But on a whole, there are many problems, and a lot of those really do come back to consistency, from the growing and agriculture to extraction to standards, manufacturing practices. A big one is also testing laboratories. And significantly, it's the state to state differences in how all of this is being regulated and what those standards are. So what one state might call, consistent quality, once you bring it into Colorado or you bring it into Michigan, you bring it into another state, everything's changed for you as a business. And you're working with completely different rules around what is allowed and what is not allowed, how things are described and how things have been legislated. What is full spectrum and broad spectrum? Well, it depends on what state you're standing in. And these are all issues that can create quite a lot of problems for a brand to understand. And to Dave's point about consistency and quality, well, as a brand, when your primary ingredient changes in flavor and effect batch to batch, well, that's a huge problem. And I would identify that as one of the biggest things that CB needs to overcome to continue to grow. But it is moving in that direction.
Okay. Henry, how about from your end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I agree with what both Mike and Dave said. I mean, one of the things that I've been harping on for a long time is the inconsistency in testing. And I don't know if it's that certain labs are just like not cleaning their equipment between tests or not doing proper protocol. Whatever it is, it's a huge problem when you've got one guy has a COA that says that, the CBD content is one particular thing, that it doesn't have any, Delta-9 in it, or that it doesn't have any heavy metals or whatever. And then you get a test from a separate lab that shows totally different things. And I've seen swings of 20% in some areas. And, that's a huge problem when you're trying to sell a commodity and you can't even agree on like the qualities that the commodity has. And so, the 2018 Farm Bill sort of envisioned a sort of uniform testing platform. For whatever reason, that hasn't occurred yet. And so, a lot of people say that lawyers shouldn't like regulation, but at the end of the day, what we need is some consistent regulation so that these guys, like when Juana's looking to buy a CBD, like Mike said, or Open Book Extracts is trying to sell it, that they can agree on the qualities that what product that they're selling has. Because if you can't even agree on that, then I don't know how you can do a deal on price. And we get into litigation all the time where we just had an arbitration filed where my client provided some soft gels and said that they here's the testing that we had. The other side got a different test. So we got another test. We have 5 tests that say different things. And so it's like, what do you do there when you're like, well, these guys, this laboratory doesn't know what the hell they're doing or whatever. But if we had a consistent testing where people had to get some sort of certification from the government that they were doing the proper things when they test, I think that would make life a lot easier.
Okay, so I think Henry's touched on some of what I'm going to ask in my next question, and I'm going to go to you first, Mike. Are there areas that we can identify for improvement? What are the right questions? Any questions that you can ask processors or manufacturers? So are there areas for improvement, and what might they be, in your opinion?
Well, there's definitely areas for improvement. I'm going to leave this one to Henry, but regulatory, there's a lot of work that can be done. But I'm not going to touch on that. I'm not the expert there. Where I'll dive into is playing off of the lab testing, creating better standards for equipment. So this is, the reference standards you use to actually understand what pure cannabinoids are, to calibrate equipment. I think there can be improvements there. And a lot of what Henry was talking about is the methodologies being used. There's not state level, there's not national levels. There are no set methodologies on how you test for specific cannabinoids. And that's when you're talking about the pure cannabinoids. If you start throwing in other variables like soft gel capsules, gummies. I think gummies are a really big challenge. There's even fewer ways that are validated to test for these products. Labs have developed their own, and they vary from lab to lab. And they're self-validating. They're saying this is the best that we've done, and we've validated within our facility. But it's not being checked by other labs. It's not being certified by state auditors. Pretty much, their truth is the only truth. And it's going to change depending on who you go to, which makes it very challenging for Dave and very challenging for myself to work with labs around how we can understand what is in the product. It's going to affect the quality of the product. It's going to affect the dose customers are getting. So the lab is a really big piece of it. And then I think this part Dave will be able to dive into more, but the supply chain. How do we as a brand understand where our hemp is being grown? How do we understand what practices it's being grown in? And then ask the big question of, in agriculture, how do you have organic hemp? How does that look? What do the regulations look like for that? And how do we create traceability so we can show our customers we have organically grown hemp under these conditions, extracted in specific methodologies, and understand that is exactly what's in our product. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Dave, how do you respond to some of the things that Mike had to say?
Couldn't agree more on testing protocol at the labs, and to Mike's point about what is the source of truth. One of the things that we have done at Open Book Extracts to inform that source of truth is to have all of the equipment that is used at these third-party labs in our own quality control lab. And we also have pharmaceutical chemists who have been at large pharma companies for the last 15, 20, 25 years of their lives, or designing our quality management system. So when it comes to reading a chromatogram coming out of an HPLC, we can have a conversation with a third-party lab if their results don't at least sync with our results within a close boundary, plus or minus 3 or 4%. And then we can have a conversation and we can ask to rerun it from an informed position. And we've gone through that process now with over 25 labs. And now we're working with the ones that closely align with our source of truth because we are very confident in the protocols that we're using to test internally. So having that secondary point from a lab testing standpoint to be able to have an informed conversation both with our lab and our brand clients when they test with their own labs and their own third-party labs and get their results, then we can all work together and solve this puzzle. But the challenge is it's still a puzzle right now. It's getting better, but lab protocols and standards will help, especially across some of the derivative products that Mike mentioned. From a supply chain standpoint, I think the biggest and the easiest low-hanging fruit would be to require all processors and manufacturers to be CGMP certified. That is a adopted quality management system by the FDA. It's by no means required for the CBD market. Right now, we hope it is. We were glad to see that was included in Rand Paul's Senate proposal. We think that a lot of the challenges from a consistency and traceability and documentation standpoint would be addressed just by overlaying that requirement. Because once you are GMP compliant, you need to have the SOPs in place with the supporting documentation to be able to have a conversation with brands, leading brands like Wana. And if you don't have that in place, and if you don't have all the documentation at the ready, luckily the up and coming brands and their consumers are expecting more from the supply chain. So again, if you're a processor and you're not thinking about GMP yet, even though it's not required or federally mandated, we think it's where the market's going, and we're glad to see that overall trend.
Great response. Henry, Mike seemed to think that you might have some input here from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of the issue that Mike kind of touched on is different regulations from state to state. And so, I wish that the FDA would take a more active role in getting into CBD and making sure that customers are getting a consistent product. I mean, you go to the store and you buy, a thing of chicken in Colorado, you can understand that you're going to get a similar product that you would get in California or wherever else, because the FDA makes sure that chicken is, theoretically grown in a certain way and so forth. And that just doesn't exist in hemp and cannabis yet. And so I wish there was a little more consistency, because what we're seeing now in the industry, these guys could probably, I bet Mike could tell more about this, is CBD has been around, it seems to me, and these guys probably, like, it's been around forever, and the new cool stuff are the minor cannabinoids. But there's a lot of the market that is just kind of getting into it. And from what I understand, the biggest buyers of CBD right now are women in their 40s. And so what they want is to be able to buy a product where they understand that when they take the product, they're not going to get high because it's hot. They're going to get the consistency that they want. They're going to be sure that it's safe. And when you have, Wana doesn't do this. They have a good supply chain, and Open Book Extracts, of course, you can trust as well. But when you have other companies who are just trying to, like, find CBD wherever, and maybe they're buying isolate or distillate from somebody who's not doing the proper things, then batches can vary from place to place, from consistency. And so you get consumers who buy it, and maybe they get a bad batch, and they take some CBD and they get a little bit high from it, and they're like, oh my God, that's not what I wanted. I want to go in a different direction. So I think it's important so that consumers who are kind of just coming into the market can trust the products that they're getting, to have some sort of regulation from the federal government, so we can have a consistent product across all states.
Very good. One last question, staying on supply chain, and you may have covered this to some extent, but what should a manufacturer look for if they're visiting a supply chain lab or processing facility? What should they look for? What questions should they be asking, Dave?
First of all, they should lay eyes on the lab, and lay eyes on every piece of the value chain that's claimed by that lab. This industry in the past has had an issue with possessive pronouns: my farm, my lab, my strain, my proprietary formulation. And so any claims that are made should be validated. Go and meet the team, see the facility, see the quality management system, trace the chain of documentation from step to step, and link of the value chain to link of the value chain. And luckily, I think that you're going to have a lot higher of a batting average of finding a reliable supplier than you would have had 2 years ago. But it's still very important to go and see your supply chain partners, meet face to face, and then demand the traceable documentation from step to step. I think that's table stakes to building a long-term relationship with supply chain partner.
Yeah, and so Mike, would you say, is that what you did, or is that what Wana did in their course?
I've set foot on many farms, stepped into many extraction labs. I agree with Dave entirely. It's extremely important. But what's most important over everything is documentation. That's going to, when you can tour a lab, but they might not operate that way every day. You need to see the documentation every batch, every time. I think that's the one other thing I would add to that conversation is, if you're not getting documentation on every batch that proves they're doing what they said they're doing, you might be getting inferior product. You can run into issues there. So the documentation throughout the supply chain is absolutely critical. And then beyond that, it is understanding your results and understanding what those mean. So that's your own QA within your own facility. Being able to recognize when things are askew and that might have errors. I think that Dave and his team having their own QA lab with their own analytical instruments is really a model that a lot of businesses should be looking at. It gives you an ability to have conversations with those labs and to validate against what documentation you're seeing coming into your facility. So not only have you been to a grow, you've been to an extractor, you then can look at their documentation and validate it with your own instruments, which is really, really great.
Fantastic. So we're going to move on now. We're going to look specifically now at regulatory, and I know we've covered a little bit, Henry's covered a little bit of it, but what is the state of affairs from a regulatory standpoint these days as it pertains to CBD? Henry?
Well, I think we're seeing some more regulatory action from the FDA and the FTC in terms of making false claims about CBD, which I think is fantastic. There was a number of letters that went out this winter about people making all sorts of ridiculous claims that CBD cures cancer, it cures HIV, all this other stuff. And to me, those people give the industry a bad name, because I think, and I'm sure everybody else on this call thinks, that CBD does have beneficial qualities, but it's not a cure-all for everything. And if people are making these outlandish claims and continue to make that, eventually people are going to think that CBD is snake oil, and it's going to go the way of, all these other trends that Dr. Oz pitches on late night TV. So I'm glad to see that the FTC is finally stepping in and taking some action against those sorts of claims. There's myriad bills that are always kind of bouncing around in Congress trying to better regulate CBD, and at some point, hopefully, we'll see some more regulation. I think we're probably going to talk about Delta 8 at some point. That's sort of a hot topic, but we'll leave that for the next question.
Indeed, we will. And I'm going to jump into the next question because it's still regulatory issues, and both Mike and Dave, you can get into this as well. But again, from a regulatory standpoint, there is an uncertainty, I understand, from advertising to labeling and probably beyond. And that's preventing big box stores or chain drugstores from, at least some of them, from stocking CBD products. What can be done? Again, Henry, we'll go to you.
Well, so, according to the FDA, it's still not legal to put CBD in a consumable product, even though, everybody does it. And so I think that's why you don't see, you can put hemp extract into products and certain other things, as Mike can tell you, but you're not supposed to be putting CBD into consumable products. So that's why you don't see those types of products at Walgreens or Target or whatever else. And all you will see there, like a hemp seed oil lotion. I don't really fully understand why they've taken that position. And it looked to me that about 2 years ago, they were going to actually change that and start regulating CBD in consumable products. And, here we are 2 years later, and it still hasn't fully happened. So I would like to see some more regulation in that respect. So again, people, can feel comfortable with the products they're buying and that they're consistent and that they've been checked by regulators.
Yeah, Mike, so how does WANA work around that? Not to say avoiding it, but how do you approach something like that?
It's a very good question, and Henry was already starting to allude to the answer there. WANA does not produce CBD gummies or CBD products. What we're doing is we're taking broad spectrum extracts of the hemp plant, and we're infusing those broad spectrum hemp extracts into our gummies. So that's the way, and there has been some precedent for this in other nutraceutical products where it's the extract of the plant itself is not regulated the same way that CBD is being regulated. So that's the way we've been operating until the FDA gives guidance on whether this is legal as a dietary supplement or legal as a food ingredient. I would say that the tea leaves are probably saying more dietary supplement, which I think would be a good thing for the industry, but really we need a decision from the FDA. That's going to really open up the doors for WANA and other brands and for Dave's business. We are getting into retailers, but even our workaround as a hemp extract doesn't always work for the big box stores. They're just playing a much more conservative take on things and are waiting for the FDA to give official guidance.
Very good. Dave, thoughts, feelings about what Henry and Mike have to say?
Look, the FDA is in a tough spot. They have this prescription drug preclusion because GW Pharma's primary active that they went into clinical trials with and marketed was CBD isolate, right? And so if CBD isolate was not in use in commerce as a consumer product prior to those clinicals starting, then it has to only go the pharmaceutical route. Well, as we all know, CBD products were being sold prior to 2013 or 2014, whenever GW started, but they weren't being sold in a federally legal market. And so they kind of painted themselves into a corner. They're asking for more research from the industry. I agree with Mike that there's a lot more clarity on full plant or broad spectrum products from the extract side. But I do see this being a two-step process. I think we'll have a dietary supplement regime for CBD, even in isolate form, probably with some concentration cap, which is going to be orders of magnitude from the pharmaceutical concentrations that are being sold in the GW Pharma pharmaceutical drug Epidiolex. And then I think step 2 will then be food and drug additives. One thing that I'll say there is it's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, right? Because I think there would be a lot more research conducted by companies like ours, and we are investing in this research to respond to the FDA's request for it. But we need to know that the FDA is going to honor a new dietary ingredient process or a full GRAS process, generally regarded as safe for some of these ingredients that we are producing, in order to make that investment into the research. So if we know that there's an end point that we all can agree to, or at least the process that's been accepted by the NDA, I think they will get a lot more research from the companies who have a vested interest and the consumers who have a vested interest in being able to find safe, reliable products that help with their own personal health and wellness.
Do you think that, what you just stated there, Dave, that we could see some of those changes, say, a year from now, or do you think we're farther out?
I think we'll see. My sense, and look, I don't have any sway on the hill, and so I don't have the crystal ball. But what I am seeing is large CPG companies and large nutraceutical companies starting their R&D processes, starting their product formulation processes, reaching out and re-engaging with us at OBX, despite the fact that we've been in contact with them for the last year and a half. So the fact that these large companies, many of them public companies, have compliance departments that are starting to allow them to engage in R&D in preparation for the dietary supplement regime, which I think they all agree with, it tells me that I think we're within a year of having that breakthrough. But I do want to reinforce now that the FDA has been utilizing enforcement discretion. And so as long as you're a brand using these active inputs into your products, as long as you're not making unfounded or irresponsible health claims, there's a thriving business here. And there are successful brands that are operating in that regime. But I do think that we're going to be within 12 months of dietary supplement treatment for CBD. And I think that's going to generate a tidal wave of interest from large household brands and leading sophisticated both THC and CBD brands who are already in the space.
Very good. Mike, what is, if you can share, what is WANA doing in their preparedness for, say, a year from now, even 2 years from now, getting ready for any regulatory changes?
We're, as a brand, we're a bit of playing a waiting game. It would be, I think, a mistake for us to start developing. I think when Dave's talking about larger companies starting their development process, I think they're getting up to the point where WANA's at now. If we start developing beyond, I think, what we've already done with our products, we're going to be guessing, and that could really shoot us in the foot. So what we're doing is we're keeping our eyes and ears open. We have a lot of products, on the shelf in R&D that are ready to be deployed, depending on how things shake out. But I think what we're doing more so is looking at what research is being done. I think that's what the FDA is waiting on before. We keep saying FDA needs to do this, FDA needs to do this. They're waiting on researchers. We could point to the FDA and say, why don't you do your own research? But they're waiting for researchers to pull data on CBD and specifically safety data. The GW drug that was approved by the FDA did notice there could be some liver concerns. So I think before we see the FDA make the decision they need to do, we need to see the research come along first on the safety, efficacy, and any liver toxicity dangers that might be coming from CBD, which I don't believe they're going to find any. I'm really looking forward. There are several studies currently being done right now that will be publishing data in the next year. So as far as what's WANA doing, we're waiting to see what those studies come out to say.
Very good. Final thoughts, Henry, on this topic?
No, I think these guys covered it. I mean, I tell my clients that as Dave said, eventually we're going to see the bigger companies getting into the business. And so the idea now is to set up best practices so you can be looked at as a leader and somebody that people want to partner with, as opposed to, being left by the side of the road. But yeah, I think they've covered it pretty well.
Very good. Henry, I'm going to go to another question. I'm going to stay with you on this to start us off. Why do you think there is such a divide still in the U.S. when it comes to CBD and cannabis? Other than people thinking they're going to get high and they don't want to get high.
Well, I think that's really the main issue is that, it seems to us in the industry that there's a pretty clear distinction between CBD and Delta-9 THC, but I think there's a lot of, in the general population, there's a significant misunderstanding about the industry. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who, back in college and thereafter, he and I used to, be pretty familiar with cannabis. And he was asking me about whether he could use a salve on his knee that contains CBD in it and whether he'd get high from that. And I was just shocked at somebody who I thought was pretty familiar with the plant and had a pretty good understanding of how it worked, didn't understand that a salve with no THC in it is not going to get you high. And so that really led me to look at this, say, there's much more misunderstanding in the industry than we recognize. I mean, to many people, it's still a very nascent product that they don't fully understand the distinction between CBD and, THC and what, smoking joints and so forth. And so I think that's the biggest misnomer, is that people don't understand that CBD is really a wellness product more than anything else, rather than a recreational one.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of jump to another question that kind of brings it all together. So according to a Progressive Growth survey, a recent survey, less than 60% of Americans do not understand the health and wellness benefits of CBD, as you just stated, Henry. So going back to Mike, first, what can Awana do to help educate customers? What are you doing?
Education is obviously the answer here, and that can be challenging because as a brand, we don't have quite the ability to do the same sort of national level advertising. So if big box stores aren't necessarily interested in selling your product, it means big publications aren't necessarily interested in advertising or education campaigns. CBD brands want to get their message out with. So we're focused on smaller channels of education, newsletters, but it truly is just continuing to get that message out as best we can. And these aren't complex topics. It's CBD doesn't get you high, THC does, and that these are different things and that they are in different markets and different products. So it's an easy message. It's trying to find the audience for it and getting a big enough platform for it. And again, some of that will change with regulatory. As we are allowed to and companies are willing to work with CBD more, our loudspeaker microphone gets bigger, we can speak to larger and larger audiences.
Very good. And Dave, open book extracts, as a supplier, you don't have a retail product, you don't have brands per se as Awana would. And I know you've started to reach out. I know you're doing starting to do a lot of PR in the trades, but you're also now starting to reach out to the consumer marketplace and trying to educate them. So that may be because you are a supplier, it gives you that advantage to jumpstart the education, if you will.
Well said, Sheldon. And we take a rising tide lifts all ships approach, and we want to be shoulder to shoulder with groups like Awana on the education front. And we think that the best enablement for education is scientifically backed data. And so we are doing our work to better understand at a mechanistic level how these cannabinoids work within our endocannabinoid systems. We're partnering with groups like AHA, the European Industrial Hemp Association, to conduct the safety studies that the FDA is asking them for. And so we're actively engaged on the research front. And then we also leap at opportunities to write blogs, share our thoughts, write articles, take interviews, serve on panels to just help help just like get to that base camp 101 CBD. I had a friend of mine say the other day that I've never tried CBD because I care about all of my brain cells. And I was so blown away by that comment for an ingredient in a product that is helping so many people with their health and wellness goals, whether it's anti-anxiety or better sleep or anti-irritation or joint pain. And so for me, that is a call to action for research and much greater involvement on education. And we view that education and research effort as, again, rising tide lifts all ships. Let's make sure we're working together here to make this market long-term and sustainable.
It's a question I haven't asked any of you, but I'll stay with you, Dave. You use CBD products?
Every day. My wife and I use capsules at night. We take them about 30 minutes before we go to bed. Helps us turn our minds off, turn our brains off, relax a little bit, go to sleep and stay asleep. I also am a former rugby player and former hockey player. And so I've had both of my knees redone. And instead of what was my daily regimen of 4 to 6 Advils per day, I now have a pain stick, a topical that I rub on my knees and get great comfort with that.
Very good, very good. Okay, hey, let's move into another area that I know when we were doing the promotion for this event, it came up. So it's a very hot topic, and that's Delta 8 THC. As I say, it is a hot topic. Henry, I think you should lead us off on it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm assuming most people understand what Delta 8 THC is, but just as a brief overview, you know, the 2018 Farm Bill explicitly amended the Controlled Substances Act. And so now on the Controlled Substances Act, the only illegal product is Delta 9 THC. And that's the one that people traditionally think of as THC, when you smoke weed, what gets you high. Now there's another cannabinoid that's become all the rage over the past couple of years called Delta 8 THC. I'm not a chemist. I've heard some people say that it's an isomer of Delta 9. It's similar in chemical structure, and it does have some psychoactive properties. I think it's about 70% as psychoactive as Delta 9, and tends to give a little bit different high. I've taken it sometimes, and it's more of a mental clarity than it is a sort of like laughing kind of high. And so because of the language of the 2018 Farm Bill amending the Controlled Substances Act, there's, at least in my belief, it's pretty clear that Delta 8 is legal on the federal level. And so people have been selling it crazy because, especially in states where cannabis is not legal on a recreational or medical basis, people can buy Delta 8 products and experience a similar kind of high. Many states have, the DEA has taken a different view and argued that Delta 8 is illegal for a variety of reasons, which I think are ridiculous. And some states have specifically done some regulation to either regulate or make Delta 8 illegal. There's, I think, 11 states have taken regulatory action. There's another 6 or 7 that are talking about it. So it's all the rage. There was a recent letter from the CDPHE in Colorado we can talk about in a minute, which again, I think is misguided. But yeah, I'm telling my clients that, look, if you want to get into Delta 8 and you want to sell it, get while the getting is good, because I think the writing's on the wall that at some point Delta 8 will be either illegal or will be regulated similar to Delta 9. I just don't think it is right now. And so, you know, I wouldn't get a huge stock. I wouldn't get a huge inventory of it if that's the route you want to go. And you got to be careful because some of the regulators have taken a different view than I have.
I have a question. I'm just going to throw this out to all of you. If you don't want to answer it, you know, that's okay. If you've tried Delta 8, what's it like to get high from that? Would you know, or from what you've heard? Is there a difference? Mike?
For me, it's a less potent THC. It's milder. It's less psychoactive, and that aligns really well with when you look at the pharmacokinetics of it. Its binding affinity is less at the CB1 receptor. To Henry's point, it is an isomer of Delta 9. It's actually a single double bond on an aromatic ring is shifted from one carbon to the next. The difference, if we were to look at the two side by side, you would have to be a chemist to point it out. They're very, very similar.
Okay. Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's aptly described. I've heard from 30% to 70% of the effect of a Delta 9 and more of a body and less of a head high. I don't know what number is right. But I think from our standpoint, we have decided not to produce and manufacture Delta 8 because I do think it's going to be a loophole that gets closed. So we don't want to invest a lot of time and energy into developing methods for it. But the bigger problem for us is that most of the Delta 8 you see in the market and the COAs that you see, the maximum purity that you'll find is like 95 or 96%. And there's a lot of uncharacterized elements of a Delta 8. If you have 4% of something, if I'm a consumer, I want to know what that something is before I put it in my body. And what we've found is that sometimes, not all the time, but most of the time, sometimes a lot of the unknown is actually Delta 9. And it's Delta 9 that's greater than 0.3%. So that kicks it into a very clear range. Hey, this is illegal by the reading of the 2018 Farm Bill. And so it's something that we have a lot of conversations about it. A lot of our clients ask us about it. Per the rising tide lifts all ships. We pick up the phone and we call Henry and we call Mike and we call Nancy and say, hey, what are your guys' thoughts on this? And I think across the board, the consistent feedback that we've gotten is, hey, it's temporary, it's a loophole, and I think that there are going to be some companies that are made an example of. For leaning heavily into Delta 8, because it does get you high, and there isn't the same protocol for safety, especially as it relates to making sure that there's no diversion or there's no taking Delta 8 into a teenager or youth's hands.
Piggybacking on that as well, I think one of the important things with Delta 8 is it's a loophole through it being derived from hemp. But the word derived or the word processed isn't exactly defined. And Delta 8 is not found in significant quantities in any hemp strain that I've come across. I've never seen a COA with 10, 15% Delta 8 THC. Delta 8 that you're finding for sale at reasonable market prices is being chemically converted from CBD. They're taking CBD isolate and they're reacting it in strong acids over 24 hours and creating a chemical conversion from one molecule to another. At that point, it starts to raise some questions in my mind is that actually a hemp extract, or are you synthetically creating a new molecule? It could be found on the plant, but I think most research says that Delta 8 found on plants was chemically converted by UV light. You can find it in smoke from smoked cannabis. It can be converted by heat. But the biosynthetic process in cannabis and in hemp doesn't look like it's producing Delta 8 THC. So the question there I really ask is it really an herbal extract? Is this really plant medicine, or is this a synthetic chemical that is being produced? It does feel to me like a loophole and something WANA has decided not to go down that road.
Yeah. Okay. So before we go to final comments, one last question. The CBD market, in your minds, is it evolving as it stands today? Is it evolving, Dave?
I think it's evolving. I think it's evolving incredibly fast across multiple dimensions. I think consumers are a lot more informed now. There's an 80% awareness about CBD in the United States right now. Unfortunately, there's only a 15 or 20% trial rate. I think that Delta is going to get closed as new and innovative brands launch products that are more therapeutically and need state specific. I think the first wave since the 2018 Farm Bill, there was a CBD craze, right? And the only thing that mattered about your product or your brand was that it had 3 big letters on it, CBD. What do you use it for? You use it for everything. You want to focus, use CBD. You want to go to sleep, use CBD. You have knee pain, use CBD. And what we're seeing now is a lot more research and innovation around technology enhancements of underlying products, whether it's water solubility or stability or flowable powders. We have unique and differentiated form factors that fit within the routines of the mainstream consumer. I don't think a tincture bottle fits with anybody's daily routine, but a dissolvable tablet would, a powdered drink enhancer would. We've seen that before. We've used these before. It's familiar to us. And so I see the innovation evolving quickly, the research evolving quickly. And then going back to the starting theme, I see the requirements of supply chain partners in this space going absolutely through the roof. And we at OBX can be more thrilled about the increased stringency and detail that is being required by brands and then also their consumers.
Very good. Henry, is there a legalese response to that?
Well, I don't know if there's a legalese response, but I would sort of echo what Dave said, that in my mind, in my view, that the market has changed significantly over the past couple of years, because what happened is you had 2018 and early 2019, the demand outstripped supply, and it was like no matter what product you had, you could sell it, and you could sell it quickly. I mean, isolate, I think a kilo of isolate in like the spring of 2019 was like $5,000. And what happened, as I see it, is many people jumped into the industry, particularly in the summer of 2019 after the passage of the Farm Bill, and grew a lot of hemp, because that used to be a big kink in the supply chain. There was never enough biomass. And so a ton of people grew hemp in the summer of 2019. And then in the fall, there was all of a sudden, there was just this glut of hemp and biomass that had never existed before. And, you know, prices dropped extensively. And then that sort of went headlong into the 2020 shutdown from COVID-19, when a lot of retail stores were closed. And so, you know, when 2 years ago, a kilo of isolate was maybe $5,000, you can get one for under $500 now. And so, you know, having a lot of companies, especially ones that just joined the industry, and all of a sudden you're projecting certain models, and all of a sudden the commodity you're selling loses 90% of its value. It's tough. It's, you know, I'm sure that Dave could talk all about that, but I think in a way it's really good for the industry, because A, that shakes out a lot of the jokers who didn't belong in the industry anyway. And B, it's made CBD much more accessible to consumers, so that you can actually afford to have that as part of your daily regimen. I mean, it went from, you know, a couple of years ago, if you wanted to add a soft gel in the morning along with your fish oil and your turmeric or whatever else, that might cost you $1 a day. Now it's, you know, 10 cents maybe. And so that's making the market much more accessible to consumers to be able to add CBD to their regimen every day and not break the bank.
Very good. Mike, you agree with all these points that both Dave and Henry have made?
Absolutely, of course. Dave and Henry have hit some excellent points here. You know, we've brought up a lot of areas for improvement, and I guess my point about evolution and evolving here is that every one of those points is being worked on by many actors, and good actors throughout the industry right now. And the only thing I'll add, because innovation is really my role and what gets me excited, and I think we're seeing a lot of innovation in hemp and CBD. Delta 8 in many ways was an innovation, and maybe it went down a track that was a little bit of a gray area, but there's also a lot of very clear with things like CBG and CBN, these other minor cannabinoids, things that Dave and team over there have been pioneering for years. You're going to start seeing these included in products. You're going to start seeing the range of products get more nuanced. And instead of having, here's your focus product, here's your sleep product, and they're all the same thing, just different marketing labels, we're going to start seeing those product formulations change for effect, making products more beneficial and more useful for many more people.
Very good.
So lots of evolution in the space.
Very good. Yes. So do you have some time here? Stick around. We can do a few questions. We have a couple questions here. Yes. Okay. How do you compare a digital supply chain with a traditional supply chain model? Dave, do you understand that question? Or how do you answer it? How do you compare the digital supply chain with the traditional supply chain?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but perhaps the question is it in the time of COVID, where you're relying much more on a digital or virtual connection in between links of the supply chain relative to, the olden days where you would go and spend time and walk through and see the production processes. Does anybody else think that's the questions being asked, or am I off base here?
No, I think so too, Dave. The digital supply chain part was a little confusing to me, but I think that is what the question.
Yeah, and so going back to Mike's point, I mean, I think it makes the need for documentation all the more important, to be able to actually have the documentation that validates every step, but even across multiple batches and multiple orders, ensuring that same documentation and that same quality management system and QA system is in place. I think by it being digital or virtual, you really need to pay that much more attention to the documents that are coming with the products and processes that you're leveraging.
Mike, I think you earlier talked about product testing. So the question is, what methods would be used in any product testing?
Well, product testing, you've basically got your every brand and every producer should be following a key set of panel tests. I won't get into the exact instrumentation on those too much. Generally they're going to be using gas chromatography, high pressure liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry. Those are going to be the equipment. But you want to be testing for contaminants. You want to test for microbes, yeast, mold, heavy metals. And then, of course, you want to have your potency testing, residual solvents testing, and homogeneity testing. That's a standard panel. Any good product should have those tests. And if it doesn't, you need to be shopping for a different product. It's as simple as that.
Okay. We had a number of other questions, but I think we've responded to them. But I had another question that I was going to ask, and it kind of ties into this last question here from a viewer. The NFL made the announcement, I think even this week, they want to use CBD for pain treatment. And so we have a viewer asking us about CBD acceptance in sports nutrition. Dave?
So I think that, look, we've seen some major influencers put their name behind CBD brands, including Rob Gronkowski, and we are excited to see actions taken by the NFL to say, hey, I want to learn more about these products and the benefits that they can provide for our players. I think that it's starting. I think I saw that there was a women's soccer player that just joined through a sponsorship relationship with Charlotte's Web. Carly Lloyd, I believe is her name. So it's very exciting to see at the Olympic level, the professional level, that there's an embrace of CBD for addressing some of the aches and pains that come from putting your bodies through such a challenging sport and a challenging training regimen. Beam is a product out of Boston that got its start through embrace from the CrossFit community. Talk about an intense workout. These CrossFit games, these participants, these world-class athletes are using this product from Beam, and Beam's guarantee is that there's never going to be a trace of THC in their products. And so you can get the benefits of CBD without running the risk of failing a drug test. And that is, I think, an important qualifier in terms of the debate, or at least the discussion that all of these professional leagues and Olympic bodies are having as it relates to CBD.
Mike?
I think Dave covered it very well, but we've obviously worked with several influencers and athletes. We have ultra marathoners, we have yogis, and they find the same kind of health and wellness benefits that our general population and consumers are using. But they're applying it for very specific use cases. And I think they're going to be, to the point and question earlier about how do we educate people more about CBD, I think influencers and larger media figures may have one of the best options or abilities to be able to get the message out there. The more this is put into the mainstream, the more people are going to be asking questions about it and actually looking for the education. You know, the content's there. If you Google CBD, there are hundreds of websites with great information. So it's not like the information's not there. We need to get people excited to want to go learn more about it. I think sports figures, mainstream media folks are going to be some of the main drivers for that.
Very good. Okay, before we go to contact information here, let's go around the horn. Final comments. Henry, anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well. You know, the supply chain, I guess that was the topic today, is getting better, still not perfect. But, you know, you're talking with some of the industry experts here with Mike and Dave. They're both doing it the right way. And so I was happy to hear what they said as well.
Very good. Dave?
Yeah, I think that my final comment, and this is the joy of being in this industry, is that we are just scraping the surface right now. So this is the tip of the iceberg from an innovation standpoint, from a benefits lineup standpoint. You know, a lot of people talk about sleep and anxiety and pain, but down the line, there's metabolic disorders, there's women's health. Going back to the sports analogy, there's neuroinflammation prevention from concussions in sports. Can you reduce the likelihood that you'll get a concussion if you have a collision? And so Dr. Deddy Muri at one of the last Cowan Cannabis conferences said, hey, 50 years from now, we'll still just be scraping the surface of what we can do with this plant. And it's such an exciting field to be in. I'm so excited to have, compatriots and Henry and Mike and just a lot of people who are entering this market for the right reasons, driving that education and research process that I think is needed for us to get to the next level. So very exciting time.
Fantastic. And Mike, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are just that as an industry, we need to continue learning and educating. Not only do we need to spread education to the public, but while everyone on this panel is experts, I think we all agree that we all need to keep learning. As Dave said, and Didi Maria said, we're just scratching the surface. So we can't sit on our haunches. We need to keep learning, keep researching, keep finding out what there is to uncover and how to do things better within the industry. I want to thank you, Sheldon, Henry, and Dave. This has been a great panel.
Fantastic. It has been. Before we go, I'm going to actually ask all of you to do this. There's probably a lot of people out there, clients, potential clients, customers, want to talk to you. Mike, how can you be reached? You have an email. Give us your website.
Mike at wannabrands.com.
And is that also the URL, wannabrands.com?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Dave?
Openbookextracts.com is the URL, and my email is dave@openbookextracts.com. Would love to hear from you.
Great, good. And Henry?
Hey, sorry, of course, the joys of working in the city, there's a fire engine going by. My law firm is Fortis Law Partners. It's fortislawpartners.com. That's kind of a mouthful. You can also email me at henry@fortis.law. If people want to talk, I'd be happy to answer some questions if anybody had any. Thanks a lot for having us, Sheldon.
Absolutely. Great having you here, Henry, Mike, Dave. Appreciate an hour of your time here today. And I'm certain that most of hopefully everybody who's been registered and listening in and watching and who will be downloading this forum moving forward will get a lot out of it. I also want to thank Nutrify Today for allowing me to host and select 3 real experts from the cannabis and hemp industry and various aspects of it. So I'm Sheldon Baker. I can be reached at sheldon@bakerdillon.com, and feel free to reach out to me. Would love to hear from you as well. Again, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay,
Yep. Super good.
thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a good day ahead.
Thanks, guys. That was fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry.
And
Thank you, Mike.
thanks a
Thank
lot to our sponsors, which is Vidya Herbs, Lifespan, and Aspirin Nutrition. Thank you very much. for making this happen.